guess I should start the traditional way. Peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. So I want to talk a little bit about questions of theodicy, questions about the purpose of life, and what I experienced in that regard from reading the Quran the first time as an atheist. I thought it might interest you. And but in order to talk about that, by the way, my wife always says I should outline my talk before starting because I have a tendency to lose my audiences. So I thought I'd start by describing why I was an atheist, because most people have a horrendous misunderstanding of atheism. And a lot of people think it's just motivated by hedonism or greed, hedonism or arrogance or things like that. I think it's deeper than that very often. And so I would like to explain why I think I became an atheist, and then I'd like to talk to you about what I felt the Quran has to say about the existence of man and humanity and our purpose. And I thought I'd present that against the backdrop of my first reading of the Quran. Does that make sense? Sorry, I keep saying it does not make sense, but I teach mathematics. All right. Well, let's see. Well, how should I begin? I guess I'll begin with my mom. In homage to my mom, I like to say that she certainly wasn't the reason why I became an atheist. My mom was the most beautiful person. I know she's my mom, and I'm biased, but seriously, she was one of the most beautiful people I've ever known, if I try to think about that objectively. She was a very devout Roman Catholic. She was not the type to live her religion on her sleeve, though. She wasn't the type to try to push her faith or her religion on anyone else. But she just lived it day by day in her daily life, through her actions. She was the most giving and charitable person I've ever known, and never asked for any recognition in return. Really, she never really got it, and never really wanted it. She used to work at 3030 Park Avenue in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in a ward for the terminally ill. She was a head nurse on that ward. And when I used to go and pick her up from work at the late night shift, I used to walk down the halls to find her, and her patients, her clients, used to call me over to their bedside. Now, these are people on their way out in life. And they used to call me over and tell me, Jeff, your mother is the most wonderful, the most compassionate person I've met. Many of them would say. I remember when she died, person after person came up to me and described my mom. They said, Jeff, your mother was a true saint. Like I said, she was extremely charitable. When she retired, and she retired because she became quite ill. She couldn't stay off her feet. She had to donate her time 5 days a week to work at the soup kitchen downtown, a very tough area of Bridgeport, feeding the poor. Never made a big deal about it. Just one more example. When she died, I had to help my father with the accounts because my mother took care of that. And they didn't have much money. But just before she died, she had about $30,000 left in her checking account. That's all my parents had to their name. They had to sell their house because the medical bills were driving them to ruin, financial ruin. So they had to sell their house. And hopefully they were going to use some of that money. But in their bank account, they had $30,000 to her name when she died. And about a week before she died, she wrote half of that. A check out for half of that to the soup kitchen. And she had no idea that she was going to die suddenly of a heart attack 1 week later. To write out half of all you had in a charitable donation, I think really says something about a person's religiosity. Not just religiosity, but human kindness. But in any case, of course, as her son, that's not what I remember most about my mom. What I remember most about my mom is how hard she worked to give my 4 brothers and I, we had no sisters, how hard she worked to give my 4 brothers and I as normal and as balanced and as happy a life as she could provide us. And that was despite the handicap that we had acquired. And the handicap that we had acquired, I'm sad to say, and you probably already guessed it, was my dad, was my father. I don't know what it was with my father. Can you hear me all right? But my father was an extremely volatile man. He was one of the most violent people I've ever met. And he was extremely volatile. He had this inner rage boiling inside him. He was like a volcano, always ready to erupt. And he erupted far too often. And every night he tried to quell that inner rage with hard drinking. But his alcoholism only made him all the more unpredictable. For he could be, honestly, we could be at the dinner table and he could be laughing and joking one moment, and then a second later something would trigger it. You never know exactly what it was. And then he would interpret something through the contortion of his alcoholism, and he would get enraged, and he would fly off the handle. And once that was triggered, the next several hours we would have a violence running through that house like you couldn't believe. I used to describe it like, here comes the tornado. When I got older. Of course, when I was a young kid, I was speechless. But it was worse than a tornado. Because now I live in Lawrence, Kansas, and I know what tornadoes are like. And the good thing about tornadoes is, yes, they're violent, they're scary, they're vastly destructive, but they end quickly. And when my father erupted, it didn't end quickly. It would last several hours and would take a good deal of hard drinking. And several hours before he would finally go to sleep. So living with my father, and like I said, this used to seem like it was a daily thing. I know it wasn't. Couldn't have been. Or we'd all be dead now. But, it seemed like it was at least once or twice a week. So living with my dad was like carrying a box of nitroglycerin. You're always aware that the slightest shift could set him off. And once he got set off, forget it. You just ran for cover. So my four brothers and I had a frightening and precarious child. But the worst of it, I was the fourth son, but the worst of it was watching my father regularly threaten, taunt, and abuse my mother. It's really not so bad when you're a child and you are the young boy, and you are the target of your father's violence. It really isn't. You're too young to even comprehend what's going on. And at the moment of attack, you just want to get out of there. You're just trying to escape. You're not thinking about the psychological and emotional repercussions and after effects. You're just trying to save your hide. And when it's finally over, you might even excuse the onslaught. You think maybe you deserved it. If not for something you did this time, then maybe for something you did in the past and you felt you got away with it. Sometimes you could rationalize it, pass it on. Maybe the next day's nice to you. And you tend to be very forgiving, at least in the early days. But the terror of watching your father go after your mother is an entirely different level of fear. Because she's the only source of warmth and kindness, of softness, of love and compassion that you know. And your already violent and chaotic existence. And you know, if he takes that away, you're left with nothing. But far worse than the fear is the guilt. It's the guilt that overwhelms you, and it comes from several directions. First of all, there's the guilt you feel for this antipathy that is growing in you towards your father. And you try to stop it. It just keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger, becoming more and more a part of you. Because we're taught to love and respect our fathers. Especially, in Catholic school, I was taught that every day. You're taught to love and respect your parents, especially your father. And we're born with a natural bond to our parents, and at the same time, you feel your own rage growing in towards them. And then, of course, there's the guilt that comes from knowing that at any night you might be the cause of this night's violence. Maybe something you said or did that your mom tried to then tried to intervene is the cause of it. Maybe something you said or did unknown. You never really know quite what it is. Maybe just his dislike of you was the cause of an argument between your mom and him, and then it got out of control. It doesn't take much to get him out of control.